Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and for this episode I'm delighted to be joined by Jeff Atmajian, who has the longest IMDb listing that I have ever seen. He's a highly sought after arranger and orchestrator who's worked with such composers as James Newton Howard, Mark Shaman, Rachel Portman and Gabriel Yared. He's orchestrated the music for films like Milk, Dark Knight, I Am Legend, King Kong, Oliver Twist, The Crucible, the 1996 version, First Wives Club, Memphis Belle. Lots and lots of very famous films. He's also been conductor for the two Joker films and Call the Midwife, but he's also a composer in his own right. And he recently scored a documentary about the Armenian genocide called Screamers, which has won lots of awards, and also for Creation, which features a 76-piece orchestra, it's huge scale. And what you're listening to now is Star Archers, which is taken from Creation. I was very fortunate in being able to interview Jeff in person in London, where he spends some of his year. And I hope you enjoy listening to our conversation. Welcome. It's really nice to have this opportunity to talk with you, Jeff. Now I can Atmajian.
That's perfect.
Okay, there we go.
Yes.
So we have a long history. We didn't realise that we go back to 1990.
No, I know. It's amazing.
Yeah, but we met earlier this year, 3
Just
weeks
3
ago.
weeks ago at Abbey Road.
Yeah. So you were working with Danae.
Yes.
And Michael Shapiro, who've
Yes.
both been on my podcast.
Okay.
So, yeah. So it's really nice to meet you. And in the preamble to this, I was talking about the fact that your IMDb is so long. You have a very interesting history. So you were born and brought up in California.
In Central California, a city called Fresno.
Right.
I'd never been out of California before I first came to Europe, which started this whole life here.
How did music first grab you?
Well, it's very funny. I'm a big proponent of thinking there should be music in schools, no doubt, right? That being said, it was suggested when I was in third grade, and this is not one of those stories where I'm thumbing my nose at history, but it was suggested that I stop taking the drumming class and instead gave out the milk at nap time. So, from an early age, for some reason, I felt like, maybe I don't have any musical talent. I bring this up because there was a very gifted friend of mine who also took an aptitude exam for music. This guy was brilliant, composer, pianist, and it also said he had no aptitude for music. I bring this up to say that we were given piano lessons, my sister and myself. Our parents wanted us to do them from the ages of around 6 or 7. And after a few years, I wanted to quit. And I think I wanted to quit, probably because, like everything else, I want to be really good at something, and maybe I felt like it was too hard, or, getting to that age, like Burt Bacharach said, where you want to be outside playing baseball with your friends and things. So I did quit. And my piano teacher, who was a distant cousin of my dad's, was the organist at our Armenian church. And I remember my dad wasn't very happy about it. I like to say that almost metaphorically, he practically wouldn't speak to me for 6 months. Obviously, that wasn't so. He grew up without much money and wanted to be given lessons and never could have them. So I sat down with my piano teacher after these many months had gone by at the church. I still remember her saying to me, when I say these things, I say them because I like to bust stereotypes. My piano teacher, Esther, never married. She lived with her sister. She was the church organist. If you were to look at her, you would think this was the most unhip woman that ever existed. She was one of the best teachers you could ever have. For 2 reasons. She taught us notation along with the piano, but she suggested when we were sitting in that church, I still remember, that along with the classical studies, why don't I learn a pop song? And that's what got me hooked. This was the very early 70s, Every generation says this, but I, as a musician, have a right to say this. The 70s, the pop music was brilliant. You had orchestras on it, you had rhythm, you had all the instruments, piano parts everywhere. So I remember she suggested I learn the theme from Nicholas and Alexandra. I remember getting the sheet music, and I started getting hooked. And not long after that, the song Mandy by Mary Manilow came out on the radio, and the beautiful piano intro, which was just gorgeous, was not in the sheet music. And this was the point when I started thinking, well, what do we do? And I decided to figure out how to write it down by ear. And that started me with some ear training, with learning to write and wanting to write. So it's a bit of a long story, but I like to say it because I know parents get frustrated when their kids might give up on something, but there's always hope. And I'm glad I had that teacher make that suggestion, or I may never have caught my interest back in music.
Yeah. Having somebody who was trying to teach you classically and notation, all that, but also having the popular music as well going on, that's quite rare because usually piano teachers you're either classical or you're jazz, but you're not anything.
Oh yeah.
You know.
I actually had a book when on the cover it showed the road to kind of achieving virtuosic skill, and on the side of the road were all the bad distractions, rock and roll, jazz, all this. No, Esther was amazing. I think she must have known that would draw me into finding a relevance to my time, if you will.
Yeah.
Which I think we all want, especially as teenagers, to feel like we're doing something that kind of fits. And it wasn't long after that, a few years later, I can still see us thumbing through the phone book, she found me a sort of jazz teacher. He was actually a retired musician. He and his wife had moved back to Fresno. Moved to Fresno. He was in Vegas for a long time. He played behind the scrim for Liberace when Liberace started out, augmenting his performance. He played for Mulligan. He showed me recordings. This was Robert Lloyd. He was like an Art Tatum at the piano.
Wow.
And Esther, again, was the one that helped me find that because she saw that I was getting interested in improvisation and such.
Yeah. Because your musical, as I say, I went through your IMDb and it's incredible. I mean, it's so long. There's so much that you've done.
Must be why I'm so tired all the time.
Yeah. You are very eclectic in the true sense of the word. It's just music.
Yeah.
Which I think is lovely. You mentioned the Armenian.
Yes.
And I noticed that you have scored the Screamers.
The documentary about genocide.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because we don't know about Armenia.
Nobody does. Even when I grew up, I was embarrassed to be Armenians. Armenians and Italians had so much prejudice against them in Fresno that my mom and dad, because they married in 1957, a couple years before I was born, he had to move out of Fresno to get a job. Wow. And that drew him back to Fresno. My mom was the first woman to work herself up to a managerial position in Bank of America. No woman had ever achieved that. She saw on mortgage forms that you couldn't sell houses to Armenians.
Wow.
So there were a lot of us, but I always felt like, the kid with slightly darker skin and this and that. And I didn't even know where Armenia was till I was in my 20s, I think.
No.
My dad spoke it, but my mom didn't, which is why I don't speak it. I wish I did, but I don't. So yes, the Armenian thing is, of course, I'd love to sit and say, oh yes, I play the ethnic card, but I know Armenian music a bit, but to be honest, I've always been very Western ever since I started coming to England at 26, I love English music and such. So I am Armenian, and I think Armenians have a long lineage of musical passion and expression. But it was wonderful to get to do this. And yes, the Armenian genocide is something that we'd like to have recognized more throughout the world.
Absolutely. It's not known about at all, is it? I mean, it's not something
sad to hear you say that even still.
Yeah.
And right now, despite what's going on in Ukraine and in Israel, there's also war going on in Armenia. Many times this comes up and nobody really seems to care.
No, and it's tragic that there is a sort of inherent racism about certain nationalities.
Yeah,
and we don't quite know where I mean, for a start, most people wouldn't be able to point out Armenia on a map.
No. Which, by the way, it's about a 14th of the size that it used to be.
Right.
It was the first nation to establish Christianity as its religion in 301 AD. Amongst Muslim nations, got along beautifully.
Right. Yeah.
But yes, it's diminished for a lot of reasons, which we don't need to go into here. And yeah, like I said, even I was like, sure I know where it is.
No. But so did your parents moved as children to the States?
No, actually, it was my great grandparents.
Oh,
my grandparents,
okay.
My parents were born in California. There was a lot of persecution started on Armenians and of course others in the 1600s. But by the middle of the 1800s, the Ottomans were particularly not very friendly to the Armenians, and they started moving to America. And then, of course, as you know, at the end of the 1800s, a lot of Europeans started coming to America.
Absolutely.
We actually have a certificate, I have it in my home, signed by the Sultan of Turkey, and our names are on the wall in Ellis Island from the great-grandparents' names.
Yeah. Wow.
So I've always said I'm very Americanized.
Yeah.
Though I don't consider myself very American because of spending 37 years here now, between the two countries.
Yeah.
But yeah, I grew up just a Californian kid.
Yeah, absolutely.
I apologize if I go on at length.
No, I don't want you. I mean, please don't apologize. I want you to go on at length. Because the whole point of this podcast is it's built on this Quincy Jones quote, which is, I paraphrase, but imagine what a harmonious world it would be if we all shared a little of what we're good at. And so that's what I'm trying to get to with these conversations, is that how you've got to be so good at what you do, around music obviously, and to just sort of help explain our place in the world and all of those things, and just to make the world a bit better, really.
I love that philosophy. And also you've used the phrase to explain ourselves. Aside from the Armenian thing you mentioned, and I know many other ethnicities go through this, but being a musician anyway, I'm not saying America is unfriendly to musicians. We know that there are great orchestras there, but like a lot of things in the last 50 years, and I've seen it change over here, we always felt like we were the minority. And I have the greatest respect for all the instrumentalists that play anything I've written. The hours and the dedication, the life. I don't mean to offend anybody that's into sports, but I'm sorry. I don't think any sports star can reach it. I'm not saying they don't have a natural talent and they don't achieve great feats, but musicians playing, particularly in an orchestra, and what they do, and for the sad amount of money they're reimbursed. And I bring this up to say that I was given the message, as my parents started getting a sense I might go into music, and I don't know how you're going to survive. I don't know how you're going to make a living. And I think the passion for it just grabbed me enough, and gratefully and thankfully enough opportunity to grow in my knowledge and my craft. It was an amazing time between that and things I started doing at university, during high school time, at a church I was very involved in. I had so many opportunities to write and play that I wish all people would have that, because that salubrious atmosphere, it really nurtures. And I love this quote of Quincy Jones's, and it's funny because we all know when you're young, you're wondering, well, what is it I'm good at?
Yeah. And
then if I'm good at something, will it even be appreciated? The whole world might benefit from it, but never know one did it, And and so it's a lovely concept,
Talk to me about being an orchestrator, because what does that mean?
And once again, I choose something that even people, they understand composer, they understand copyist, but in the middle of that, orchestrator. A studio exec a few weeks back who I was talking to didn't understand the difference between arranging, orchestrating, composing. This is somebody that works in the music department at a big studio. No disrespect to them, I mean, that's not uncommon. And I've always wished that I could just spend a few hours with them. Anyway, for this person, I sent a few voice memos explaining the difference between each, and they were just thrilled. And they even said to me, and what is this thing, music prep, I see everywhere? And I said, copy houses that used to be copyists have kind of taken on a role, because sadly there's far less work for everybody than there used to be. So they're taking on a role where they're saying, we cover everything that has to do with preparing the music for the recording. It can sound creative, but it's not necessarily, or they might bring in-house an orchestrator or an arranger. And I promise not to take forever to answer this question, though I'm very good at that. But I love to give people backstory. In Hollywood, in the 40s, 50s, not so much after that, most of the time composers, certainly arrangers and orchestrators, would work on the studio lots, all in a big room together. The Andre Previns and all the greats would be in a room together saying, I've been given this chase cue, it's really long, well, you want to do those 40 bars and I'll do these 40 bars. So, you want to know about an orchestrator. Historically, when one writes music, they will write everything. In fact, if you read about the great composers, they usually compose their music and then they'll take a few months to orchestrate it. It doesn't mean when they compose it they haven't thought about what, must be kitchen closing time, everybody. They haven't thought about what instruments will play it, but there's a lot of detail in a full score, a full orchestral score. You could think of it like a spec for building a really fine building or a fine Formula One car or something. Every tiny detail has to be ideally notated clearly, particularly because in film recording, you don't have a lot of time. Time is money. These amazing musicians, they see this music for the first time, and they play it.
Yeah.
So you want everything to be as clear and precise so it goes down well. So I'm getting around to saying that in the world of film particularly, and in musicals, you would have people that were great at writing, say, a nice song, right? But knew nothing about the orchestra. So historically, orchestrators came about, we were really finishing the composition. You might have a beautiful Cole Porter song, but we were the ones that decided how the accompaniment would be, what the intros would be, not just the notes, but the texture, whether it would get big here or not. And in film, there were many trained composers who could do it all, but they might not have the time to do the detail of a final score. So their orchestrator's role might not be so creative, but it was still important. Now, many times, a rock and roll star might be hired these days, or somebody that's got a little skill at writing music, but they may not really have even the understanding of an orchestra. And again, they make use of us. I believe as an orchestrator, I still have to honor their voice. The last thing you want to do is say, I'm gonna be the star here. Composer should always be the star. But I guess it's my way of saying that it's a very hard thing to explain, but if somebody were at a recording session with me, I could, and they heard 3 different orchestrations of the same piece, maybe one that was not done very well, and they would see not only the difference in the sound and the feel, they would see the difference in how the musicians were invested in the music because they were honored in the way it was written well for them, so they weren't struggling to play things that were awkward. And that's, I don't know if that helps anybody.
That does, and because I've never seen an orchestrator in action until I came to the Danae recording, Abbey Road. Because that was really interesting, because there you were, sitting next to Danae, who had written the music, but you were the orchestrator, and there were moments where, so Michael Shapiro as the conductor.
Yes, and Robert on the piano.
Yes, Robert on the piano, and then all these musicians who were sight reading.
I know, and brilliantly so.
Incredible, yeah. But you would occasionally say, that note, that needs to be piano, whereas the other one, you understood the intricacy of the sound, the overall sound, but how the minutiae of the second violin playing an E quietly rather than, so that you could hear the clarinet playing their G or whatever it was.
Good observation, yeah.
Yeah, and that was fascinating. That was really, so you understand how each instrument works and sort of meshes together.
Absolutely, that is a very important thing. When composition, particularly, I bring up film because that's the world I work in, and that's what most people hear, as opposed to classical music. But when music is written with more than one, if you will, melody going on at once, which is rarer these days, sadly, the skill of orchestration is even more important. Understanding how to balance different instruments on different lines so they all come through clearly and have the right prominence at the right moment. If you created a beautiful color in a chord, You want it to balance right to create this effect you're looking for. And those things, there's no way, you can't write all this stuff down. You always will have to do some shaping. I mean, Mahler famously always changed his orchestration depending on the hall he was in, because the room might maybe make the brass too bright or this, so he would do little detail changes. So we will always do what we call tweaks. But you may have noticed, I can't remember if you were there for all this, sometimes I would actually tell people not to play certain things. Sometimes I would add some things. Maybe the producer wanted a little bit different effect over a couple of bars. It's lovely because it's dynamic. And yes, I guess I have a lot of experience in knowing how quickly to speak to the musicians and give them instructions so they can quickly add notes or what to take out. So yeah, that's an important role for, I believe, someone like me as well. By the way, can I just give a shout out, if this doesn't get it out there, because the project had a lot of big music to do and my schedule was busy, I thankfully was able to engage 3 other people who helped orchestrate on some of the pieces. Who I can't imagine anybody else being able to do this kind of music, which were Patrick Russ, John Call, and Jeff Alexander, who all did beautiful work as well. And I bring this up to say that I was there at the session, but I was also, obviously they did some of the pieces, so I would have to quickly suss what they did, and one often has to do that as the orchestrator. You might be the only one in the booth, but there might be other people's orchestrations, so ideally it's my job to know everything really well, so that everybody else, if they have needs, I can be the person that helps facilitate it.
Fascinating. When you leave the studio, having recorded that, so you've obviously got the recording that you think you consider to be ready for mixing and mastering and all the rest of it. Are the parts, or is the main score, have all of those changes been annotated within? Yes,
I make markings in my score as we go along and do it.
Right.
And possibly the engineer might do so as well. It all depends. By the way, I notice I've used as Sir Humphrey says, the perpendicular pronoun a lot, the I. I do want to say, and I know this sounds like, I'm supposed to say it, but it is true, it's a big team effort. I'm not making it sound like I'm the only guy that knows how to do all this, but I certainly should know how, because like on that project, I knew I was the one with the most experience and knowledge regarding the orchestrations there. Yeah. Just as Robert was the one that knew the piano more than any of us. So any of us that do these roles, this is what we will do. And yes, we make these notations so that if it's ever performed again live or recorded again for any reason, we remember the adjustments we made.
Yeah. Brilliant. And
it's fun, by the way.
Well, absolutely. Sitting in the sort of the booth behind where you were was absolutely fascinating for that session, because I could see how everybody's role was all sort of meshing together. It was absolutely,
it was a great team, all of us.
It really was.
Michael, Robert, Emilio and Danai, Gerhardt there with John at the booth.
And obviously
the mixing board.
Hila and
oh my God, Hila and Sangeeti. See, I didn't get to really. They were off in a booth. Oh my gosh, what voices they have! I wish they could have been out in that room with the orchestra.
Yeah, and obviously there are technical recording reasons why not. But that of course is the difference between a sort of live recording and something that's more considered perhaps and technically different. But it was, breathtaking. I was literally sitting holding my breath a lot of the time, listening to the piano and watching Michael conduct and hearing the girls singing, and it was just
it's
stunning.
Something you don't get to do every day. You realize, wow, this is quite rare.
Absolutely. And I
still feel that way even.
Right, and I can't wait to hear the finished album and know that I was there when some of that was
That's what's really fun, isn't it? Now, Hilary, did you ever go out in the room with the orchestra? I can't remember.
Yes, went upstairs onto the...
What a feeling that is, to hear the live sound coming at you, not through speakers. But
and it's physical, isn't it?
Very, very. That's why I love... Sorry, everybody, plug for live music.
Nothing
like it. Watching them, hearing them, feeling it. No speakers, no electronics.
Absolutely. Yeah. Even today... I watched a little bit of your recording, because you were recording called The Midwife at this Abbey Road, which used to be Angel Studios.
Yes, it's called
it's Abbey
sort of
Institute.
Abbey Angel or Angel, something like that now.
But watching you conduct, I had that same sense of it's where the live and the recording sort of
come together.
come together, and that's just amazing. So yeah,
it's funny. It's easy for those of us who are fortunate enough to get to do this a fair amount of time to almost forget that it's rare. It's quite special thing to do.
Yeah,
I could have never imagined when I left Fresno. Before I moved to LA to go to USC, I drove down. I found the name of an arranger on a Barry Manilow album whose arrangements I liked. I looked him up in the Union phone book. I took the initiative to drive to LA. He was kind enough. Somehow I was able to get him on the phone and let me come to his house in Beverly Hills. For anybody that knows the name Shirley Horn, he played me a song he was writing at the time. Guess what it was?
Oh, tell me, I don't know.
Here's to Life.
No.
Artie Butler, who wrote the music for that. He played this and I was like, oh, that's gorgeous. And it was years later when it came out and became a big hit. And Artie took me to a recording session at Evergreen Studios. First time I'd ever been at one. I still to this day don't know who the composer was. I know it was a version of Johnny Belinda, and I still remember seeing a scene where in the film, because you see this film playing while they're recording, a woman in a kitchen, I guess it's not a very nice scene, but to save herself, she throws a thing of boiling water on this bad person's face, I guess, when he comes in to try and attack her. And it stops him. And I still remember hearing the composer write like these tight harmon-muted trumpets and strings going ding as a sort of sting that goes with the water. And I was like, wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I bring this up just to say that I could have never imagined that. Artie said to me, you won't know till you move down to LA really all the opportunities there are in music. And I'm glad I did, because I never thought I would be an orchestrator. I had thought I would be a composer or songwriter. And I liked that I worked my way up. Sort of, I did copy work, I was doing arranging, and fell into this world. And you may have this down as your question, and I'll pause for the moment, but invariably people ask orchestrators, do you wish you were the composer, or why didn't you become a film composer? If that's a question you're going to ask, I'll stop now.
It's not, because that's like asking a viola player,
don't you wish you were
first violinist? And it's
actually a great analogy in a way.
Yeah, because actually, without the viola player, the first violin doesn't sound so great. Without the flautist, the clarinetist doesn't. You know what I mean? I think it takes all of those bits working together.
Well, see, you bring up a beautiful point, and it's much more, dare I even say, almost socialistic. What's the right phrase? Where everybody is working together towards a common good. It's not about the individual's ego.
Right.
The reason I bring it up is it's very natural. Obviously, we live in a world where everybody likes to, who remembers the person that won even the bronze or silver medal, let alone who got fourth place. And the film composer gets their name at the front, and they are the star, and they have to deal with a lot of things, right? Yes, it could be invariably that the orchestrator might know way more about music than the composer, or they might not know anything. But often the composer has this gift, that an orchestrator might not have. A special voice, a way of writing things, it could be quick. I bring this up to say it's not unnatural for an orchestrator to want to basically eventually be the composer, because we, if we are really well trained, like I believe I am, effectively are composers.
Exactly.
I know I am, and I've been asked by even two very well, I can say their names, both James Newton Howard and Gabrielle Yared, have long tried to almost help me start a composing career. So the two questions are: did you ever want to be an orchestrator, and why didn't you? And in a way, what you've just described, Hillary, is my reason. I kind of like working for musicians. I mean, James and Gabrielle, these are towering talents. Whereas as the composer, they have to work with producers and directors, which is exciting in its way, but it's a whole different set of issues. And I won't lie to you, I probably never had the belief that I had what it took musically, which I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I think was wrong. I think I would have had it, but it is a different life, and I'm happy with the one I'm doing. I work with these amazing talents to get amazing films. I learn as much from them as anything they might benefit from me.
Yeah.
because they have these gifts that, I mean, James I've never seen anybody just, he could have written all this brilliant music. It had been approved and everything. We're at the session and the director changes his mind, because that happens all the time. James will just go back and write something else.
Right.
I mean, he's just so prolific.
Yeah.
And he's always been so gracious to me. And Gabrielle Mark Shaman has been amazing to me. So the fact that I even get to be around these people, I mean, it's like, what?
But also, they wouldn't sound the way they sound without orchestrators like you.
I mean, they are kind enough to say so, but somehow I think, it's like Bach. You could write it for almost any group and it's still Bach. But yes, they are gracious and kind enough to know that I'm there because I and the others who get to work with them as their orchestrators, we're there serving their vision and their view. And, it's not just us, it's the musicians, the way they play it. Sometimes I think maybe what I do is, we all want to think it's all based on the creative thing I brought to it. But sometimes it is just the fact that if I did everything really well, it means the orchestra plays it, they're not stressed, like I mentioned earlier. You don't know how many times I've heard players tell me they have to struggle with badly written, badly balanced parts, and therefore they can't give to the music what we know they could. So maybe these composers' music flourishes more because the orchestra is running at top speed like a Formula One car, because I haven't gotten their way, if you will, by doing the right things that inspire them. You can see I'm a little guarded because I'm not trying to sit here taking the credit for what these composers have achieved, but there is a lot of symbiosis to all of this, Even the copyists, we want to make sure the parts are well written so they're read well. The engineers are important. The conductor could be important, could not, it could all depend. All of this. The players, though, I always go back to them.
Yeah, well, because they are the people
they bring it to life. Yeah,
absolutely. But that's the joy for me about music, and that's why I love doing this podcast, because there are so many people who bring their talent to the game.
Yes.
And without all of them, the world would be less harmonious, absolutely, and would be less of a joy. So,
I love you have that view. I think that's so true. I mean, I always thought if people would kind of like, look after their diet and their body, I do something called get Rolfing treatments in chiropractic. We all need to with our jobs. Right. And I always think between that and maybe, if everybody played an instrument, it'd be a more peaceful world. I might be wrong.
Yeah. No, I think there was. I wish I could remember who it was who said that they would like to take, all of these kind of warmongering, people that do all this stuff that's so violent, and actually, sit them down with a percussion instrument or sit them at a piano or whatever, and give them something else to focus on, and the world might be a bit better.
I know. We wonder.
Absolutely.
I definitely think music is so. It is unique. I mean, writers are amazing. I think painters are amazing. All these things. But weirdly enough, the things they do in the media they use and all that is based around things that are part of our everyday life generally. Obviously, painters try to frame things to help us see differently, or photographers. And writers spin wonderful stories. But music is the synesthesiology and the element, the notation. It's not understood, but everybody can feel something from it.
That's right.
And I love that you know that it has a value to humanity like that.
Absolutely. So I've mentioned your IMDb listing, which is insane.
Well, I do want to say something. And by the way, this is already, I've negated the fact that I want to say this shows my humility, because if I was properly humble, I wouldn't have said that. But I want you to remember that though most of those films, I might have been the only orchestrator on or done the bulk of it, there are many films in there where we're part of a team.
Yeah, of course.
And this is important to know. And there are some films in there where I think I might have done maybe a tenth of the score, but we still get our credit listed. Just as, there are other names on films I've worked on where they maybe have we'll give an assist, because we often have really short time limits, and sometimes it's a lot of music comes in late, so you need a team.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is, yes, if I had been the only orchestrator on every one of those films, I would truly have had no life.
Oh, well, no, absolutely. You couldn't possibly have done it. But actually, these are some of the biggest films. I didn't realise that you had been involved with Milk.
Yes, with Danny.
That is just
I love that, and I love his score to that.
It is a stunning film. The music is amazing, and I think it's an undervalued film.
I agree.
It takes a story about our relationship with people who are different to us, and it tells it in a beautiful way, and it's stunning, and the music is just incredible.
You know what, if I may say, growing up in California and in the 70s as a teen, I knew who Harvey Milk was. We all knew about this man, and of course back then we did carry some prejudices. I'm not saying we actively did, but you heard funny things and rumors, but we all remember him cleaning up the dog poop, so it was funny to work on a film. And this was a period when Danny was, like the Good Will Huntings and all, doing these beautiful, different, effective colors. Yeah. And of course, I was lucky to get to work with Steve Bartek, his main orchestrator, on that film. And that was a real joy. We recorded that at Air Lyndhurst Studios here in London.
Oh, okay, right. And obviously there's Dark Knight and Joker and those big ones. I mean, these are films that people will have heard the music that you have had an impact on, even if you only did 100 bars in one piece, you've still had that impact.
Those, thankfully, I had big involvement on all those.
I mean, these are big films.
No, it's true. You don't think of it at the time, because sometimes you work on a film and you have no idea if it's going to go anywhere or not. And back in the 90s, I remember, The Fisher King was thought to be a pretty cool film. Yeah. I remember You've Got Mail was a huge hit.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did with George Fenton,
Yeah.
And then Chocolat with Rachel Portman, that was very popular.
Yeah.
And that we had to do in very, very little time.
Right.
It's so funny you're bringing this up, because I remember as each decade goes by, the films that were the big hits seem to recede, and then suddenly it's these films now.
Yeah.
I worked on the South Park movie.
Yeah.
I would have never thought that 20 years later kids are still like, oh, that's so cool. I'm like, why? You know what that is?
Yeah. And of course the big hit of the Netflix thing at the moment, All the Light We Cannot See.
Oh, that's James's beautiful score.
Yeah, that's stunning music again.
Yes. That we did a year ago,
Right, yeah.
No, it's true. It's true. Yeah. I have to go back to saying James is so hip. I mean, and Mark is just so brilliant. Mark Shaman and Gabrielle, so this beautiful voice. I want to say something about Gabrielle in a minute. And of course, as you know, to work with Hilda Gudnadottir and to work with Rachel Portman for many years, and George. I learned so much because George was my starting point. I mean, from him, watching him conduct with no click, all these things. George Fenton,
who
was in your Memphis film.
Yes.
To think that I get to work alongside these people. It sounds like a false humility, but it's really true. It's kind of like, wow, don't forget, this is quite a singular thing. You can't do this job in many cities in the world even, which is frustrating sometimes, because it means I'm tied to a few cities. But
well, actually, then that brings me to the next thing, which is we're sitting here in London, and you obviously spend some of your time in California and some of your time in London. I guess you just have to be very organised and have teams of people that you work with. And
well, it's interesting, because London and LA have long had an association. I mean, even Star Wars was recorded in London. Films that are made in LA might score in London for one reason or another. Some of those films that are made here, scored there. These two cities have been the main, if I may, the mecca for the best recording for decades, and I do mean decades. But, I guess simply to say, I got to meet Elmer Bernstein at the start of my career. I was a copyist on a film, got to be the librarian, and I met him and his orchestrator, Christopher Palmer, who sadly passed away January of 1995, who's a name I'd also wish everybody would know. This man was brilliant, and he's the one that really brought me work. Through him, I met George Fenton. Christopher reconstructed. We worked on albums of music from the musicals from the 40s and 50s, reconstructing them. Long before, if I may say, no disrespect to John Wilson, but Christopher was doing this kind of thing well before, and beautifully. There's a beautiful album called an MGM Musical Spectacular that came out again around 1990. We recorded at Goldsmiths College in 1989. These are brilliant reconstructions of all the beautiful orchestrations. I'm bringing this up to say that Christopher was from here, and when I met him, I said to him, I hear that you use assistants. He was an orchestrator. But unlike all the rest of us, what he did is he would take Elmer's sketches. His composers write short score type sketches to get through things quickly. Christopher, instead of being the orchestrator that put him in full score, never bothered writing out the full score. He would just annotate the sketches very clearly with all kinds of instruction. Wow. And which is how I learned to do that, both as composer or arranger, to create those things. It's a skill that's long lost. Anyway, he gave me a piece of Elmer's music and said, okay, orchestrate this, bring it to me in 4 days, I'm going off to England. And he thought that I showed promise and brought me in on a big project that Pat Russ, who I mentioned earlier, was involved on, and we recorded in Nuremberg in Germany. I'll keep this brief like I'm unused to doing. In January of 87, I flew over, having, like I said earlier, never been out of California, scraped together $600 to get airfare. And then Elmer was doing a film in Munich, but in the interim, Christopher invited me, because Christopher was going back to London, to come to London, put me in touch with an English family who I lived with. They were lovely, Jack and Dorothy Bloomfield. They had an extended family, so almost immediately I felt the embrace of family here. Within a year, maybe fell in love with a girl, or didn't last, so then another one. But within the first couple of years, between the romance of the heart, the amazing opportunities in music, and the culture.
Yeah.
I used to do magic as a kid, and the books all came from England. I couldn't get enough of being here, so little by little I would come back over the first 3 years, 2, 3, 4 times a year, and then finally, the year I met you, 1990, was when I moved here properly. And to wrap this story up, since then, that's when I started my residency application, and I've had residency ever since. I have literally split my life. I have a house in Venice Beach, which I bought in 1993, and I have a studio flat in Primrose Hill and a flat that I live in Belsize Park. I work in the studio flat. So yes, I always say I'm a man without two countries.
Right.
And you're right, it takes organization. It's not always easy. It's not easy in relationships.
Yeah.
Regarding work, though, in an interesting way, one might argue, out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
So sometimes I'll go back to LA and my friends will say, oh, when are you going back to England? I'm like, no, I live in LA.
Yeah.
I'm in England. They're like, oh, how long are you here for? No,
yeah.
I live here as well. I've never known anybody to fully split their life like this. Elmer had a place here. I know British composers who are successful that keep a place here. But to really, truly split one's life, it's not easy, but it has presented me with nice opportunities.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think in the last 30, 40 years, it's become clear that the film industry is one of those industries that is truly global.
It is, and it truly bridges these two cities. I mean, the execs on a lot of the films we work with are always jetting back and forth between the two cities.
Yeah.
No, that's the wonderful thing, that there's such a strong relationship between them. And I have many times sat at my desk in London creating orchestrations for stuff that will be recorded in LA, sometimes on a project where I'm not even going to be at the session.
Right.
Because I couldn't get to LA, or maybe I wasn't the main orchestrator, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So yeah, you never know. On the first Joker film, I started working on it in LA. I came to London because I had planned a trip with my nephew that was a long plan. Finished working on it in London, and then flew to New York to do the recording.
Right. I was going to ask you, where did you spend your lockdown, or which bit of lockdown, or were you, how did that work for you?
Well, it's a good question. We were working on The Little Mermaid, and we'd finished the songs to The Little Mermaid just in early March of 2020, and with Disney. And I had known, because I'd taken 2 trips between LA and London in January and February, and I'd seen when I go back to LA more and more people wearing these masks, wondering what was going on. And so you want a short answer, let me give it to you. I spent it mostly in LA. Disney called me a week. I was due to fly back to LA on the 19th of March.
Oh, wow.
And I would have stayed longer, but a dear friend of mine, Joseph DiBiase, was turning 60 on the 22nd of March, I think it was. So I wanted to be back for his party.
Oh, wow.
Well, This was like trying to get me out of Saigon. Disney was like, I think the world's going to lock down. Can we get you back sooner?
Right.
I said, no, I want to go. I still will go on Thursday. I left on Thursday the 19th. California shut down the next day, the 20th. And Britain locked down on the 23rd.
Yeah.
My friends in Italy were locked down in February.
Of course, yeah.
So, and I stayed there, and I chose to do so because it felt, I have to admit, easier.
Yeah.
I have a standalone house, and in America, it can be quite easy to get goods. And
oh, yeah.
So it was the longest I'd ever been away from England. I was away for, I think I came back in late September.
Wow.
When things seemed to calm down for a bit.
Yeah.
But that year and the next year I was away from here a lot.
Right. Yeah. Because there were all sorts of funny lockdowns, weren't there, where things you could do some things but not the other, and all of that sort of stuff. I can imagine it was.
I'm sure you're going to have to edit this out, but yes, unless you were a member of Parliament, then you could get away with a lot of kind of things. Sorry.
Absolutely. I'm not going to edit that out. It's true. We have proved that it's true.
I know the inquiry going on now.
Yeah.
But no, you're very right. It felt. I have to admit, especially I felt from my friends in Italy, some of them, the draconian rules and the small spaces they might have got stuck in.
Yeah.
But yes, so I was able to kind of skirt the most difficult of it, which I think was harder for people here than for us in California.
Yeah, I think so. I think there were lots of people in London, particularly living in flats. Living in apartments with no garden, and
I mentioned my studio flat, the one I used to live in it next to Primrose Hill. I bought it in 1995. And then I got a bit bigger place later. I thought, wow, if I had to be stuck in there, it's just one room and a kitchen and a bathroom.
Yeah.
Primrose Hill is right outside.
But you were only allowed out once.
We were only allowed once.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be like looking at it, and oh my God, I would have never managed.
No, absolutely.
And then I think of a family or somebody with kids.
Yeah, and particularly families with children who had to do school, online, and
we know it's
small,
had a long, reaching impact. Yeah,
absolutely. One of the things that I'm planning to do in 2024 is produce a book of how musicians dealt with the pandemic, because obviously we've had all of these conversations going back. I started this podcast in May of 2020, and I think it's a historical.
I could tell you some interesting things about how we dealt with it.
Right. Well, it was different in different parts of the world, and for some musicians, it's hard for them to say it, but they've actually gone, do you know what? I was actually really creative. Because I didn't have to go and sit in planes. I didn't have to go and sit in airports for 4 hours, not able to do anything and not able to create, not able to play. I can sit at home and I could practice, and there are all sorts of people who've learned a new instrument or just woodshedded and just exactly. So it's very interesting, very interesting.
Well, you said the very thing. I will in your next year's podcast, if you want to hear about all the projects I worked on and how we dealt with them. I'm happy to tell you. We don't have to do that now, but I will tell you one thing. Just what you said, and I heard actors say this too. First of all, the burden of being out there wondering if we should be looking for work before anybody else got it was removed. That anxiety. You're right, we were focused at home. I ended up writing a piece for flute and piano that seemed to be taking off with popularity.
Right.
I would have never had the time to sit down and just do that. I have to admit, that's one aspect I really miss. The world felt so quiet.
Yeah.
And it felt like there was space to hear and create.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's next? I mean, more of the same, I guess. More sort of orchestration, film work, television, music, Disney, Netflix, all of that stuff. What else is happening?
My close friends and my mom, and my sister and brother, they know this well. It's that the number of times I've told them over the years, I don't know if I'm going to, how much work I'm going to get in the future, or if there's going to be any work. And they'll say, look, how many times have you said that? We all say this. We think, for all I know, this could be the last job ever. This has been a very busy year, more than I would have expected. And I have other projects on the go. But at the moment, if you were to ask me, I'd say, I don't know, maybe this is it for me.
Wow.
We always go through that.
Yeah.
We wonder, will we get a call again? Well, for me, it's not, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but okay, I think I finally accepted at the age of 63 with that long IMDb list that I know what I'm doing, and I know what I'm doing. But sometimes you wonder if that level of skill and expertise and all that is valued. It is valued when it's valued. I'm working on something now that I won't mention, but in future, if it works out, I will. There's a lot more product out there that passes with far less need for skill and quality and depth and all that. That's the only thing that makes me wonder if I shall become obsolete. More probably I'll become more rarefied, you know, it's the more specialist. Though, I mean, the simple stuff I can handle easily, but so can many others. So to answer your question, one just hopes that it will continue as long as we can do so. The thing that I value more than anything, and this was true on Donna A's project, this was true on the second Joker thing that I just did with Hilder about 6 weeks ago, all the people on that project were lovely. They were good at what they did, and they were respectful, and that is the thing I love more than anything. I have to admit, I've written so much music that it's hard to get as excited as I used to be. I still work just as hard. I still don't bathe for 2 days. Don't let my friends hear from me in the step because I can't get this bar right, you know, because I still care. But I realize, you know, there are fewer things that really, I think, wow. And I have to admit, writing a little bit of my own music, even just to write it, not to become the film composer, this, that, is one thing that I still enjoy, even though it's easy to think, why? There's so much good music out there that doesn't get heard enough. But we do it because of what you kind of said. It is something, I know you said we are good at, but it is also something that is a mark of who one is. Whether anybody wants to know that, it's kind of like, you know, I think of Beethoven's symphonies. They as much not only mark a development in musical advancement, but they tell you who Beethoven was at each stage of him writing them. They're biographical. They're not programmatic, and that's fascinating. You would never want to go back and say, why don't we reorchestrate the third symphony, you know, the way he did the ninth or something like that.
Yeah. And actually, you write music, you orchestrate, you write whatever, you do all of these things just because that's what you do. And
exactly.
It's almost...
It's like if fish has got to swim, we got to write.
And that's what the joy is, that the joy is in the creation of it. And if other people like it, that's almost a bonus.
You're exactly right. Exactly right.
Very good. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Well, I hope the listeners are listening, because I want to thank you and also for your patience. Listeners, I was stuck longer at the end of a recording session than I thought I would be, so Hillary has been amazing. And beautiful questions, by the way. Really, really
thank
wonderful.
you. So editing this a few weeks later, I'd forgotten what a wonderful conversation that was, and I hope that you enjoyed listening in. Thank you for joining me once more for Harmonious World. What you're listening to now is Morning Song, which is also from Creation, written by Jeff Atmajian.
Sweet
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.